Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and a very warm welcome back to another episode of the Arabic in 60 Steps podcast. I hope you guys are having an absolutely amazing day, and your day's about to get better because we have my best friend in the whole world on the podcast, our brother Ryan Rodriguez. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you today?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, nice to be here. It's a little bit chilly here. I don't know what it's like in Somalia.
I have been watching from afar at the
So
shambles that you've got to deal with in Europe at the moment, weather-wise and football-wise, actually.
oh no, don't talk
And
about that.
yeah, here in Somalia, it's pretty much always 29 degrees. Doesn't really get colder than that. I was told it would, and to be honest, it's too hot for me. It's yeah, I don't know if our bodies work like this. You'd know better than me, but I feel like my body's just expecting it to be drizzly and about 6 degrees, but it's not. So my body's expecting the cold weather to sort of this time of year be wrapping up warm and not going out. But Somalia doesn't care about that. It will always give you about, it's supposed to be between like 22 to 32 degrees throughout the year. But the whole time I've been here for the past 3 months, it's been pretty much just 28 degrees, 29 degrees all the time. But have you got snow at the moment?
It's a lot of frost, but I think snow is expected anytime soon. Let's see.
Sure. Cool. So today, obviously, I really want to talk about Arabic Workshop, and I really want to talk about this like really, really cool project that you guys have got going on soon. 18th of December. We'll start with this. So if anybody drops off the podcast, I'll start with just letting them know. 18th of December, World Arabic Language Day, 100 Days of Arabic Workshop YouTube channel, as well as on your app, right? All the resources will be there too.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. I think driven mainly by the app, but we'll put as much as possible on YouTube. Yeah.
Great. But there'll be, of course, there's more ability for you to provide support and resources for it within your own ecosystem, isn't there, on the app? So
yeah, exactly. So I think the benefit of the app is we've built over the years, we've built the vocab builder. So if you're wanting to kind of get a sort of dictionary as you're going along, then you'll need to be on the app. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I've already started a WhatsApp group for students on the Arabic in 60 Steps program. For any of my students who are on that program who want to be involved in the 100 Days of Arabic, we already have a WhatsApp group for it. If you haven't seen the update for that, I have posted it in our students community. There's 35 students of mine who are in it now. And we're anticipating more students joining as well, inshallah. So it's really exciting on our end too. We'll be following along with it too. But yes, we'll kind of build up to that. But I'd like to sort of talk a little bit in the beginning, just to give some context to the audience on where this has all come from, like what Arabic Workshop is and stuff. So if we could obviously talk a little bit to Ryan Rodriguez and when you started learning Arabic and what your journey's been like a little bit, that would be really interesting to me to get some context on that. So how long ago did you start learning Arabic, and what has your approach been since then?
Okay, so this is going back a few years. I think I started learning Arabic seriously 1998.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually a year before I became Muslim. So the path has been a bit of an eclectic mix, so I've kind of dipped in and out of things. The only thing I did with real consistency and followed all the way through was the Medinah books, the Shu'aba course, and so that was my kind of grounding in grammar. Yeah, I don't think it's really interesting because obviously my mind's kind of scientific. I like to categorize things. It's part of medical training, isn't it? And so grammar was really, really interesting, and it was really good, and it was really measurable. It felt like I was kind of making good progress, but it wasn't usable. That was the big thing for me. Comprehension was very difficult, because you'd always have your dictionary. Almost every word was a visit to the dictionary. And you can imagine, for the first kind of religious book I picked up was probably Aqidatul Wasatiyah, and struggled on the first page. It was torture.
Even after all three of the Medinah books?
I think so, yeah, because
Sure.
The thing is, kind of building up a technical expertise in the Arab doesn't really give you a lot of comprehension.
Sure.
And it's really quite easy for you to kind of go down the rabbit hole and, okay, I want to know about the rules of all the mansubat now. I want to know the rules of all all the different types of verbs that you have, and be able to classify them and that kind of thing. And it gives you great, I mean, don't get me wrong, it gives you a great sense of satisfaction being able to look at one of those tables and understand the whole thing and know, great, I got that, like I really understand it. And the messages that you hear all around you, at least at the time, was was that, this is the scaffolding. If you can understand this, if you can understand your conjugation table, you've cracked Arabic, right?
Sure.
And that just wasn't the case. And I think over time, and since actually starting this project, I've kind of really now understood the difference between a technical linguistic competence, which is all you probably need if you're going to be translating for the rest of your life, right? And the difference between a communicative competence. And so I think that's the kind of distinction I think people need to make before they start their journeys. Like, what are you really wanting? If you're wanting the first one, the linguistic competence, that's great. There's lots out there for you. I think there's no structure in the second way. So there's not a lot. And in fact, the path is not meant to be structured. It's not meant to be that, if you're looking at authentic material, it's not meant to be that structured. But I think what we need more and more is teachers and people who are guiding other people to be able to say, well, look, I think let's develop your communicative competence maybe first, or give it a larger proportion of your time. And then you'll have a lot of vocabulary to be able to kind of grasp grammar really easily. So, I don't know what this looks like in the long run. I think, we, like Arabic Workshop for me is like a journey at the moment. And we're discovering more and more about what users, we call them users because of the IT, I suppose. So learners, I suppose I should say, what learners are missing, what learners are frustrated about. And so it's really about kind of trying to get closer and closer and closer to that.
Sure. This is
solution.
This is kind of a recurring theme when I have other Arabic teachers or people creating resources in the space that we have. This discussion between something which is kind of very mechanical and very structured, which has great benefit for lots of students, of kind of going through grammar. And we do that on the Arabic in 60 Steps program as well. Like that, it's a clearer proposition to make to a student that we'll cover this much. And the things aren't, they're not, it's not wrong to have those things, right? But I think a flaw that lots of our programs have, and it's something that I've recently really tried to improve on with the Arabic in 60 Steps program, is quite often we package the whole program as covering all of these nuts and bolts of Arabic. And then when they're ready to go out into the world and really enjoy the best bits is when we say ma'a salama to them. And like that's kind of the case with the Medinah books. And in my experience, because of the nature of how lots of students in the West access the Medinah books, whether it be online or they go to a bookshop and buy them, like I end up with a lot of students who have done it for a bit and then come to my program. So I know a bit about like what students are like who have kind of done half of the first book or something like that. And I've even realized at the moment I'm teaching like an intensive version of the Arabic in 60 Steps program, and we're coming to the end of it. And this year with those students, I've been really fortunate that I've had students come into the intensive program who already have quite a lot of Arabic, so we've been able to use a lot of the time to do stuff beyond the program. And I think an issue that we've done a good job of tackling with the 60 Steps program recently is having something beyond that where it's actually practiced. But it's in our case with our program, it needs to be wrapped around a clearer structure of a series of steps, because that's just a clearer way for students to be able to track their progress in some way. Because as you say, like having real fluency in a language is something that's quite hard to communicate to a student what it means to be at certain levels of Arabic, and even when it's so dependent on the learner and so dependent on what efforts they'll put in, it's a really hard question to answer when a student says, well, what will my Arabic be like at the end of this? and stuff, or like, or what does fluency look like? It's so
Yeah.
much more. But I think in our community we've started to use better language to describe that. Like recently, a kind of a phrase that I've kind of coined recently in my content is to think of Arabic as more play than performance. Like it's not a performance that should sort of be critiqued at a particular time. And often people, because we have such a strict kind of community on making sure that, you know, astaghfirullah, don't you dare put a fatha where there's supposed to be a kasra, you know, are you some ahmaq, this is mamnu' min as-sarf, like, you know, we have like, I don't know, I think sometimes because we have such a focus on grammatical precision, we do that really at the expense of people developing fluency, and I think that's a real shame. The video of Arabic workshops that I saw recently that I really loved, that the title was Aw Kama Qal, it was along the notes of like fluency or proficiency. Was that the title?
Fluency versus accuracy, I think.
Fluency versus accuracy, that's the one. Right, yeah. So like, so quite often people who are fluent in a language, like us in this podcast, if students of the English language were to listen to us, they'd probably find mistakes in our English just because we're speaking it in an open way. And it's the same with me. Like I have an Arabic teacher, and my Arabic teacher and I, he doesn't really plan a lesson for me. We just have a conversation about what's going on in the world. Just as a teacher, it's important for me to just keep my spoken Arabic, you know, in practice really. And we make mistakes all the time, like, you know, between the two of us, like we're just having a conversation and we're just talking about what's going on in our lives. And, you know, sometimes on the end of a word, as I'm calculating it in the moment, I'm not 100% sure whether it's a fatha or kasra. You know, come for me if you will, but sometimes I just run through it because that's.
So I can relate to that completely. So I actively chose to do exactly that, and my teacher ended up kind of working on the project. So he's Alaa, who's going to be a Hakawati for the project, and we'll talk about the story listening in a minute. But
sure.
He's so what we were able to do, or what I pushed for, was to move to the stage where we weren't going to correct grammar, we weren't going to look at vocabulary lists, we weren't going to do testing. The way he worked actually was, while we were having a class, and we just like randomly picked topics like, you know, artificial intelligence or beekeeping, which is what I do. So he wanted to know about that, and then I'd ask him about what life was like in Damascus when he was growing up as a child and things like that. And so he'd have a Google sheet where he'd just type all these words up that he was kind of explaining to me as we went along. And honestly, I have not looked at any of the hundreds that he's done. And he may have stopped, I'm not entirely sure. But then one day, I think maybe 6 months into it, he turned around to me and he said, you know, have you been revising all of these sheets, because you've kind of picked up a lot of vocab, and you know, your speaking is getting better and better. And I just said to him, no, I hadn't done that. Like I literally read the research, and you know, I've got a very superficial reading of the linguistic research. So I'm sure as soon as academics start looking at our material, they're going to kind of pick out, you know, things that I've talked about. But even with that superficial reading, if I was going to test what I was reading about, so for example, the incidental learning hypothesis, you know, where we learn incidentally, that's how we pick up vocab. If I was really going to test that, I really needed to do it myself. And, you know, I was really surprised. So we've got a common friend who was also involved in the project. I met him in Istanbul after 2 years. And he was like, wow, you're near native. And I was like, I'm sure I'm not near native, but thank you for the compliment. And, you know, it's good that I've, that my Arabic's improved. So I think it's kind of like trusting sometimes that the fact that actually you're going to acquire language subconsciously. That's how we acquire language. And deliberate learning of grammar it's all about making what we're trying to learn, making it great. You know, getting excellent Arabic versus just a kind of functioning Arabic, if that makes sense.
A previous so sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to interject that a previous guest on the podcast, Habib from Ihsan Arabic, some of that. Oh, cool. So something that he said that I really liked is that like learning of grammar isn't necessarily supposed to be prescriptive, but it's supposed to be an explanation of Arabic that's already been inferred or something like that. And I thought it was very, very nicely put. It's and as I mentioned at the time, like it's something in our program that we noticed. Like so often we might give students something in Arabic. Like, for example, the example that I gave was broken plurals, right? So like Arabic in its organic form really doesn't care what step of the program you're on. So like a text that you read might use a broken plural, right? And some of the broken plurals, they can't take tanween, right? We don't need to go into the details of that, right? And like we see those broken plurals in the very early steps of the program. For example, we see the plural of masjid, masajidu. And at the time, students just kind of accept it. They can use it. They know what it means. They know that it goes in the word. They know that it's the plural, and they can use it in their sentences. But then later in the program, when they actually understand, and when I deliver this lesson and understand the nuts and bolts of this particular pattern and stuff, it's an explanation of Arabic that's already been inferred, and I could really resonate with that when he said that. I just wanted to interject that because he had said something that was so nicely put.
No, that's great. I mean that's one of my pet tidbits is exactly that, and I was really glad when you mentioned that because I think kind of looking at the history of grammar, of course, grammar was not codified at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and certainly not when the mu'allaqat were kind of popular. So grammar kind of came a lot later, and of course we know that there were at least there were two major schools, three minor schools, and so the two major schools disagreed with each other about what's a nominal and a verbal sentence. I mean, if you got that kind of basic disagreement, it can't be all that important. Do you know what I mean? To kind of get perfect. I think using Arabic in the right way is kind of more important than your understanding of the grammar. I think that's the kind of message that we kind of put out. So yeah, I mean, there was something else that I wanted to mention about the grammar bit, which was that'll come back to me. Don't worry. Sure.
Okay, so like that's
something, but don't worry, we'll come back to it.
Sure. So yeah, so that's kind of a good that gives us a good idea of kind of what your Arabic language exposure was in the beginning, like going through those books and then having a teacher. At what stage did you get an Arabic teacher? Did you kind of immerse yourself in those books as the first thing that you did, or was that very early in your process?
So I actually did book 1 and 2 by myself. I think I completed those within 6 months, which was, I mean, it was, I think the rule that I had then was that I only allowed myself to kind of do an hour every day. And that was my kind of trick to kind of keep myself enthusiastic about the next day. So, that hour went, and I wanted to do more, and I was like, nope, you're going to stop now, and you're going to carry on this enthusiasm the next day. So, okay, 6 months. I struggled with book 3. I mean, you can see suddenly that book 3 gets very, very technical very quickly. So I sat with a good friend of mine, a brother who's a student of knowledge from Medinah, Sheikh Faraz from South London. And so we completed book 3. And then we started reading Tafsir ibn Sa'di. And then eventually moved on, class got bigger. Actually, at that point, it was just me. So the class size, so, everything we talk about on the project is actually things that I've experienced. Class size is getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it was just me and him. And then we then took on Usul al-Fiqh, and that suddenly the class size kind of blew up. But at that point, I struggled. I really, really struggled to keep up. It's something I keep meaning to kind of go back to, is just to kind of get an introduction to Usul al-Fiqh. But so I think the next few years was a little bit of, try lots of different things. I had a young family at the time. My son was born 2003. So I think that kind of coincides with the time that I kind of took my foot off the gas, and then started thinking about, well, what do I really want with Arabic? And I think in the midst of all of this, meeting Arab brothers, right, and then making those steps towards them and seeing the change in the way they deal with you the moment you start speaking Arabic, those were the kind of experiences that made me think, well, hang on, there's something else that I need to be doing with my Arabic here. And I think that's what got me thinking about it. But I think it would be another 10 years before I then went on to italki and found someone to actually just sit down and do conversation classes with. I think in that time, obviously being a junior doctor was was my main concern as well. So that kind of came in between. But yeah, so I think if I were to look back and say, well, look, okay, this was a journey I took. It took this level of motivation, right? I'm not sure that we could extend that to everyone. Do you know what I mean? Like, I had a very set, I was very set on getting my Arabic working. And in some ways, I mentioned to you that my Arabic started before I became Muslim. And so for me, my Arabic and my Islam became very intertwined. I appreciate it's not the same for everyone, but I think subconsciously, I try to have the conversations that I have in myself with Allah tends to be in Arabic. I try to make that effort. And so if that means that I'm trying to learn to speak to him in a kind of natural way, then I'll go off and learn the vocabulary that I need for that particular dua, that particular,
that's nice.
To
that's
that
nice.
kind of thing. And so I think that's kind of like, that's been a motivation for me. And I appreciate that's not going to be the same thing for everyone. So I think the point I'm trying to make is it's quite a lot actually that you've got to invest in. And if you're not seeing the returns for that straight away and you're not kind of looking towards the end, it's quite a hard path to take.
I think that's it's something for students to kind of be aware of what success in that actually looks like. Like, you used an expression there, which is really interesting, about getting your Arabic working. And I'd be interested in a bit more about that process, because there's, I mean, probably lots of graduates of mine, they're at a position where they have lots of Arabic. They've been through lots of Arabic. They have lots of words. They can access lots of things. But there's a feeling of not only like getting your Arabic working, but then also kind of keeping it working, and what that looks like, because like Arabic doesn't really have a progression, or learning any language have a straight progression like that. I mean, sometimes you just have a conversation that doesn't go well. Sometimes, like, you might have just had really good conversations for a long time, and you just I don't know, like, some day it's just a train wreck. You can't get the words out. You don't have the right vocab for that particular conversation or something. And a student without the right understanding of what the progression looks like and what a regular active user of Arabic's experience is like, it's that can be an issue. So I wanted to ask you, what did that process look like for you, of when you say getting your Arabic working? Sort of, what is the timeline like, and what things did you do?
I think if I condense all the kind of bits where I wasn't doing Arabic and say, okay, look, this is the cut, if you like, of the sequence of my Arabic career. I think I would say maybe seven years kind of explicit learning, so rules, vocab lists, 2 years to get it functioning, like seriously, or even 18 months. And that just came from having a conversation. I think one of the things that I decided to trust in was something that's called the natural order of acquisition, right? And so what you've got to appreciate is, like, you can throw all this input in, and we talk a lot about input on the project, but your brain will only produce or it will only acquire in a certain order. So there are certain grammatical concepts, for example, that you could learn and explain, but sometimes you may not even acquire it. And in English, I think it's the kind of present continuous, which for non-natives is extremely difficult, actually. And a lot of people can explain it, but they'll never use it themselves. So I don't know what that looks like for Arabic. I don't think the research has been done. But we do know that there is a natural order in which people will just produce language. And so if you were to, for example, I struggle, I'll be honest with you, I struggle with a lot of the mansubat, like producing them, you know, tamyiz and things like that. I just don't produce it naturally. And I think that's going to come later on. But one of the things, this is what I thought about earlier on. Something really basic that really bugs me, but again, I don't know what research has been done in Arabic, is that we teach past tense before we teach present tense.
Okay.
Right? But actually, in terms of usage, you know, past tense in almost every language comes after present tense.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think there are things there where, you know, we clearly do that because it kind of fits into the codified grammar, and, you know, we feel that an understanding of trilateral roots is kind of important for students from a grammatical point of view. But, you know, in daily life, like you're going to ask, is the dinner ready? Is the, you know, are you ready to go to work? You know, that kind of thing. You're not really dealing with the past that much initially. So, yeah, I think that, kind of coming back to your question, those conversations, I guess reading the linguistic literature while having those conversations with Alaa, you know, just allowed me to kind of look at, well, actually, what was happening in this conversation? Like, you know, did I really end up using past tense that much, for example? Did I understand when he was using mansubat a lot? So yeah, that's the thing. And it's just kind of, I think what happens is, like, the first 3 months is just about you trusting a process, trusting the idea that I'm going to pick this up subconsciously. Whereas 7 years of grammar were, you know, made me think, well, I've got to make sure that I've got this correct. And you know, you've always got that mental itch that I've got to go to the dictionary and check that I understand the exact meaning of this word.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's I think just being aware that that's going to cause a lot of anxiety. That was what that journey involved for me.
Imagine if the Arabic grammar books started with the ana af'al or whatever it is. Like, imagine if the workbook started with ana aktubu rather than kataba. If it started with I write instead of he wrote. Obviously, as you say, because of Arabic's unique structure, there are good reasons for that. That we start with the most kind of base form of the letters, and usually we're teaching students for whom the Arabic script is not their native script. We want shorter, more, there are good reasons for it, as you know, but it is an interesting idea to play with, as to if we delivered it the same way that European languages, when we learned them, our focus is entirely on speaking. If we delivered Arabic in that kind of same order, it would be that's an interesting thing for me to consider. Or even if we use the imperative, much like when we look up a verb in the dictionary, it's the imperative that they're actually looking for: go and eat, and, you know, that's well, the most base form of the verb, I mean, is the imperative. Go, eat. It would be, that's interesting. And would the transition between that, because I've never really questioned it, to be entirely honest with you. I haven't questioned whether we do that, because understanding the transition from kataba, yaktubu, uktub, it's easier to have the smallest and then expand it into other things rather than the most used. But if your real focus is speaking, then that's not necessarily the case. Like, is it much harder to learn aktubu first than kataba, or is it much harder to learn uktub before I don't know. Like, the fact is, in a spoken context, it really doesn't care about what's more complicated grammatically. That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, and to be honest, like, as you're learning and acquiring language, you might not see connections between related words. You know, if you've got a 10th form of something and a 4th form of something else, you've not necessarily made the connection between the two, even though we've trained you with grammar to be able to see that. And I think the reason might be because when we acquire language as opposed to learning language, we're looking at the semantic value of that word or that sentence or that phrase. We're not looking at, you know, does the form fit? So sometimes you're not going to recognize that those two words are linked until you kind of, you know, it might occur to you. And that's really why kind of incidental learning is so powerful. So incidental meaning your language is acquired incidentally while you're doing something else.
Yeah.
It's just so much more powerful. And conversely, taking a grammatical approach, you know, if you think about what we do with children, like a child, let's take a hypothetical situation. A child learns the word for cat, pitta, and then, you know, sees a dog and says, هذه قطة, grammatically perfect, and you say no, right? So they're not going to turn around and like mentally process, oh, my grammar was wrong there. It's like the semantics were wrong there. هذا كلب, right? And so I think it's kind of thinking about what your brain is doing, like what is it optimizing for, and what is it you know, what is it naturally picking up? And so I think that's really what we're trying to push for. I'm sorry, I'm kind of like leading, you know, pushing us closer and closer to the 100 days of Arabic. But that's really what we're trying to kind of get people thinking about, is like, where is the I'm trying not to use the word efficiency, but, you know, where is your brain working optimally when trying to pick up language? And yes, I mean, grammar can help you along the way, but I think let's say you dedicate, I don't know, 2 hours a week to grammar. Let's be optimistic, 3 hours a week to grammar. I don't know. You know, perhaps you need to counter that with 150 hours of reading or listening. You know, I really benefit from the grammar, right? Although even that, there's a little bit of contention about, in the sense that, you know, what I was trying to allude to in fluency versus accuracy is if you start coding for accuracy, you kind of start hindering that acquisition process, because your brain is naturally thinking, did I get that right? Did you know, what's coming in terms of, should it be fatha, should it be tanween at the end, you know? So yeah.
Definitely. I can, you know, to be entirely transparent, in my role as an Arabic teacher, I even really I really kind of avoided even using Arabic, because I sort of found myself in a position where I thought, well, if I'm telling people that I'm a mudarris, right, there's a certain expectation that I'm not going to do a khata, am I? Because I'm a mudarris, you know? And that's like, that, like, I knew in the moment. I remember being in the masjid. I was living in Northampton at this point. I'd always speak to the imam there in Arabic. Like, he wasn't Arab, he was from Tanzania, actually, but had a very, very high level of Arabic. And I found myself, I was like, are there any students around listening? Like what? But what, honestly, like, it's funny now, because, like, you know, we're in a better situation, but like, how sad is that? Like, how sad is it that a student of the Arabic language, or anybody, is thinking, I shouldn't be using this beautiful language right now because I don't know if the tamyiz has fathas, kasras, or dammas. I can't remember that lesson, right? How sad is that? It has fathas, by the way. But but like, how sad is that?
Yeah, I keep thinking to kind of put a video together just entitled, you know, make as many mistakes as you can.
Sure.
And not me necessarily talking to people about making mistakes, but perhaps me having a conversation with someone, showing them how many mistakes you really can make, and you know, get away with it. Like I was thinking maybe, you know, one of our classes with my classes with Alaa, to just switch the camera on and show them what actually goes on in a lesson like that. So I think yeah, making as many mistakes as you can. I think that's an interesting one, isn't it? Like I think because we're being taught, and so this is not you know, I just want to like preface this, but this is in no way a criticism of the students of knowledge, you know. May Allah bless them for what they do.
Amen.
But you know, they live in a world where they've got to be as accurate as possible. You know, the whole idea of fiqh, starting off with definition. Like you clarify your terms of reference, and you make sure it's like a really precise art, science, beg your pardon, both, combine them, whatever it is.
Sure.
But the point is that when you come from that world and then you suddenly take on Nahu, so your natural instinct is going to be towards that perfection and that accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I think the world that you live in Medina, when you go there, it's easy to attribute your success to the grammar books, because they kind of fit in with your way of thinking of what you're trying to achieve over there. But I would actually say, so this is something that's been studied in medical students, and I used to do a lot of education with medical students. A large degree of success in studying medicine, and I suspect that this is true of any kind of profession, even outside the academic field, it's the unwritten curriculum, the unplanned curriculum. So, you could have these books laid out in front of you on anatomy and physiology, but unless medical students are talking about it in that language in their own free time, they're going to have a really tough time kind of coming up to the exams. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're literally speaking Greek without realizing.
They literally are, yeah.
And the only way that works is if they form cliques. I mean, you can go to lots of universities, the medics still will be a clique because they're literally speaking a different language. And so I think that is also true of students who go to Medina, go to Mauritania, go to wherever, right? They're all speaking a certain language. And I don't think that, so they're learning Arabic as a second language, essentially. I think taking that and applying to those manahij to learning Arabic as a foreign language, I think the rules have changed there, and we need to kind of look at, well, what do people need to do to kind of gain success here? There's a whole different environment at play. So
I agree.
Yeah, that's a lot to think about, and especially for learners. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, I don't know the kind of professions, for example, of learners that you've come across, but we do a lot of user interviews, and I've spoken to people who've achieved success as cardiothoracic surgeons, radiologists, and things like that, just because of where I am, and the terror that comes to them when we speak about their Arabic. It's just yeah, it's unbelievable, really. And I don't think that can be attributed to motivation. I think a lot of teachers like to attribute that to motivation. I really don't think it is. I think a lot of people really do want to master Arabic, or whatever mastery means, but they do want to get a really competent level of Arabic, and it's things outside their scope, really. It's things that they have no control of, but it's just these environments that they're being immersed in. So it's not their fault. I think that was one of the first messages we wanted to put out, really.
Good.
So I don't know if I'd be interested, like, is that an experience you have with your students?
Yes. You mean particularly students who are high performers in some way in their lives, and then yeah, absolutely. Because of the intensive program, particularly, which is a big focus of mine at the moment, because of its price and stuff, it's often very high performing people in their careers who are people who enroll on it. So I have a great privilege of sitting with people who are doing amazing things in their life. Like at the moment on our cohort of the intensive students, we have a professor of Spanish literature from the US. We have someone who's in like the tech startup world in Silicon Valley, and we have someone who's also a medical practitioner, a doctor of 40 years as well, and as well as people who have kind of more corporate roles in the Middle East and stuff like that, and are doing well for themselves in that sense. And yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, often, because they've achieved such amazing things, all of them, to be honest, in their professional lives and stuff. It's number one, it can that sometimes. They've never said this explicitly, but if they struggle with things, there may be a slight feeling that because they've been able to achieve such great things, it's an issue with the program, maybe. They haven't said that, but it's me reading into some of the things, maybe sometimes, or yeah, but it definitely, I would definitely say that it's not a case of them being of not having the motivation for it. They're definitely people. I've got people in front of me. I'm like, these are very, very capable people. But particularly in the case of someone who's a professor of Spanish literature, like this is an incredible linguist. Like this is a person who obviously has the capacity for it. So it is on us as teachers to really think about our delivery of it. Something else that Habib said, actually, that sometimes our Arabic teaching unfortunately ends up being delivery of Arabic plus a motivational speech, which is a problem. Like there's definitely things better than that we can do. So on the note of things that are better than that, I'd like to start by asking you, what can be achieved at 100 days of 100 days
Right.
Arabic? What can be achieved at 100 days?
Sales pitch, yeah. So it's really quite a simple idea. If we can get a huge amount of input in a short period of time, we can show people that actually there's huge benefit in this. And what we need to do at the same time is kind of get them to make a slight bit of a mental shift, in the sense that deliberately trying to test yourself is not going to work for you to have acquisition. So that's the kind of basic proposition. 100 days, I mean, I have to say at the start, this is not anything revolutionary on our part. So something that I could maybe refer your listeners to, or your audience to, is the Stories First Foundation, right? So there's a lot of work that's been done by them, particularly a Professor Beniko Mason, who's she's an English teacher, but she taught in Japan. And they had a real problem with getting people to kind of graduate because they were just not meeting the English requirements. So the idea is input via story listening, which is something that she developed. So not storytelling, story listening, and we'll talk about what that means. And that happens irregularly. So that might be once or twice a week. And the idea with that is that you're aiding comprehension. So you tell a story, but you're using, actions, repetition, explanation by another means. And the example she gives, which is really good. So if she starts with once upon a time, well, we don't explain it by saying once means this, upon means this, a time means this. She'll turn around and say once upon a time, 100 years ago, maybe. It's a long time ago. So if you use like 3 sentences to try and explain that one basic concept, or you might be the first time a person comes across the word donkey, right? She'll draw a donkey. The drawing's not going to be great, and that's part of story listening, right? You're not meant to have great artistic pieces of work. It's meant to be something that just people notice. So it might actually look like a dog. And so part of what you do is you say a donkey is an animal, a donkey is not a dog, a donkey is not a this, a donkey looks like a horse, this is what a donkey is. And then you might draw something that's kind of unique to a donkey, right? Big ears, that kind of thing. So the idea is that you're using these things that they call comprehension aiding supplementation. And you're going through relatively short story, but you're padding it out. And all the while, you're getting people to understand vocabulary through other vocabulary that they've already picked up, or they already understand, or an image. So from the 100 days point of view, that's going to be the Hakawati series. So we're doing one novice session and one intermediate session each week. And then in between, we're going to release via the app the serial. I think you've mentioned it on your channel already. So there's a reader series, I think written in the 60s, perhaps. I can't remember exactly when, but I think it's based on Ibn Ishaq's Sirah. Okay. We think. And the Sheikh who wrote it for, I think it was teenagers or slightly younger. It was just a reader series of, I think it was 24 books. it comes to roughly 137 chapters. So that's where we got the idea for 100 days of Arabic. And so each chapter will be anything between a minute to 10 minutes, and it's been narrated. So we got someone to narrate that. And so the idea is that you're able to listen to the story, ideally just listening, but if you need, we've got the script there for you on the app, and you can actually click each word and bring up the meaning just so you're not struggling. And so the idea with this is to try and make it compelling. We're trying to use the attachment of Muslims to the seerah. I think a lot of us have kind of seen glimpses of the Prophet ﷺ's life, whether we've heard it in khutbahs and circles and what have you. So I think it'll be nice for people to kind of see it start off with his great-grandfather, Hashim, all the way to, the end of the seerah, and to be able to kind of get a nice overview. So that's where, incidental learning, you're actually turning up for the seerah.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, we're going to learn a lot of vocabulary. And the way it's written is really beautiful. So, I mean, I think if you start off at the beginning and you think that you're going to struggle with this, if you just stick with it, a lot of the vocab, a lot of the phrases and sentences are repeated time and time again. So you can kind of, gradually it starts becoming more and more clear as you go down. And you'd be surprised. Like I think kind of halfway through, you're going to start getting the feeling that you're seeing the glimmer of fluency, So yeah, I'm really hoping that that's going to be something that really excites people. And I think there we're trying to make use the fact that it's a familiar story. So you're going to start doing what we call top-down processing. You're going to start predicting, oh, this is coming up. Maybe you don't know the word for cave, ghar, but you know hira, right? So it's like ghar, hira, and then you kind of connect the two dots that, when you hear the story of the Prophet having his first revelation. And so I'm hoping that you're going to have loads and loads of those moments. And likewise in story listening, we're going to be covering things like the 1,001 Nights. I made that quite short, 101 Nights. 1,001 Nights, and also that book that we really, I don't know if you struggled with it, I really struggled with Kalila wa Dimna.
Oh,
yeah. So he's going to simplify those stories so that you can kind of get the gist of the story. And perhaps eventually be able to kind of tackle it by yourself, just because you're then going to be able to predict the story. So yeah.
I really love the concept of incidental learning. I found myself really learning a lot about different cultures and languages generally when I'd sort of just read like historic novels, like particularly when I read Khaled Hosseini's Kite Runner and what is it, A Thousand Splendid Suns, his next book. I realized after reading them, kind of behind my own back, I'd learned quite a lot about Afghanistan, because the books they're all set in Afghanistan. I read those books when I was sort of 14, 15 years old, and I realized how powerful that is, like that you can learn things almost incidentally. Like I haven't turned up to learn a lesson on the history of Afghanistan, but I probably learned more from reading those novels and novels like them that are set in different countries and stuff. Like there's novels that have people from other cultures and stuff, and I learned so much from them incidentally. Like there's one called The Road Home, which is about a Polish man who moves to the UK. There's La Guernica as well, a book set in north of Spain as well. I learned so much about like the history of those places and those languages that almost, as I say, kind of behind my back, like incidentally, I learned those things, and to see that applied in Arabic is really, really cool. So that's it seems that that's a big aspect of this 100 days of Arabic.
And I think, as you've mentioned, incidental learning, I think, from the learner's perspective, I think the thing to take away from that is learning is incidental, acquisition is incidental. So if you haven't paid attention to a bit of vocab, like, don't worry about it. You don't need to pick up the dictionary. You're going to come across it again, right? And it's going to happen many times. And if it doesn't, let's assume that it doesn't. It's probably not a word that you need. So there's a little bit of kind of natural selection, if you like, of the kind of frequency language that you need to kind of pick up. Is like, you're never going to. So I mean, it's stuck in my mind. But there's a word that I was reading a book with Alaa, called Al-Qawqa', which is about the experience of a Christian Arab in Syria during the time of I think it was Hafiz Assad, actually. So he had, I mean, like, I'll let you read the book if you're interested in it, but it's all about his kind of experiences in prison and things like that. And he was accused of things that really didn't make sense. Anyway, like, one of the words that I came across was this word that I don't think I'll ever use, but there's literally an entry in the dictionary for ishra'abda, which is just one form, that there isn't any, there aren't any other forms for that word.
Okay,
and it
literally
means to do this.
Okay. Okay.
When I'm gonna use it, I don't know.
You have to try really hard. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's, I mean, that's like a really interesting read as well. If if anyone's interested in linguistics, is really to try and understand vocabulary frequency and really what's important to you as a learner. So yeah.
That's really cool. So people listening now, obviously students who are on the Arabic in 60 Steps program, I've talked about us. We have a WhatsApp group specifically for it. And I'll make sure when we get a bit close to the time, I'll make sure everyone's downloaded the app. It'll just be the best way for us to engage with that. So we'll kind of have our own little support group. But generally for people out there, like what's the first thing for them to do and to make sure that they're in the loop? But by the time this episode goes out, we're probably a few days before. So people have a few days to kind of prepare for it. So what should people go to make sure they can be involved?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to perhaps go to the web page. So it's 100daysofarabic.com, and just get a sense for what the program is about. So, it's not for absolute beginners. I think I should say that right at the start, because you will struggle with it. You do need to know the alphabet, because you're going to come across it again and again. Particularly when Alaa kind of writes down meanings and things like that, you're going to need to have some idea of the alphabet. Familiarize yourself, if you can, with the app. So that's at app.arabicworkshop.com. Just go through a couple of the free lessons, just so that you can kind of navigate your way, so that when you start, you're kind of just getting on with it. And yeah, I don't think that there's much other preparation, really. I think the whole idea is it's meant to be as relaxed as possible. I think getting yourself a cup of tea, if it's the first thing you want to do in the morning, or a cup of cocoa at the end of the day, whatever it is that you need to do to relax while you're listening. We don't want you to think of this as a lesson. We want you to think of this as kind of exposure to the language. This is where perhaps all your lessons are now going to come in and be and spark joy, I think is the phrase, isn't it? We want people to, we want this to spark joy with people. So yeah.
Something I've seen you mention in some of the videos in the build up to it is that one of the great benefits that students can take from this series is not only the Arabic that they're going to be learning, some of it directly, some of it more incidental, is that actually the habit of being in the habit of learning Arabic so frequently. And that's something that's incredibly powerful, because the languages, they're learnt little and often, or a lot and often, but the often is the most important thing, so
the most important thing. Yeah. And I think getting into that habit of ramping things up and ramping things down. So if you're busy, fine, just do something really tiny, but just keep it going. I think that's the most important thing. That's kind of, I'm sure it's going to be a marker of your success when you think about it, is actually it was the consistency. I just showed up every day, even if it was just for 2 minutes.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that, right? In things that we've achieved success in. So
definitely,
yeah.
So there's two questions. There were times to ask them earlier, but I really wanted us to get on to the 100 Days of Arabic. So I'll use the opportunity now before I let you go. So the first one is, obviously, you, like, with your Arabic teacher, did you say his name's Alaa? your Arabic teacher?
Alaa, yeah.
Okay, good, mashallah. So was he when you went onto italki to look for a willing human to speak Arabic at, was he the first person who was willing to put up with you, or did you have other teachers previously that you went through?
Oh no, he was the first person actually, but I think what italki actually did quite well was kind of allow people to kind of show their profile and show their personality. So at the time, I can remember having that anxiety about usul al-fiqh. So I wanted someone who was going to give me kind of working Arabic, but also had a kind of sense of kind of religious, the ability to kind of go into religious reading. So you see a lot of people that are offering lots of different things, and it can be just conversation and things like that. So I think, choose what works for you, really. It's not going to be a one size fits all.
Because I've actually been through a few Arabic teachers, and I think it's important to find the right personality for you. Because like when I turn up to my Arabic lessons, I want to talk to my friend as much. Like when I have my Arabic lessons with him, like it's really not like I've got to do this Arabic lesson. Like my Arabic teacher and I, Mohammed, he's from Syria originally, but he actually lives in Sudan now. And yeah, like him and I, both live in East African countries, and like we've both moved to that place, and we've got loads in common. I just really enjoy his company, and I'd say having somebody you can have some consistency with speaking your Arabic with is such an integral part of getting your Arabic working and keeping it working. Because like in my life, I don't live in an Arabic speaking country. Arabic is known on quite a big scale here in Somalia, but people don't speak it every day. Like it's not a language that you sit in a cafe and you hear people speaking. So like my amount of exposure to spoken Arabic sort of goes up and down. So but to have something consistent, actually having a person who I speak Arabic to on a regular basis has been a huge part of my Arabic working well now. So I wanted to kind of give the audience just a bit of an insight into that. Like if you try someone, it doesn't work out with a teacher, that doesn't mean that the strategy is wrong. Like it just means try some other teachers until you find someone who genuinely just you enjoy their company. That's been a huge part of the success with my teacher Mohammed, and also he contributes a lot to me as well, because I like his Syrian Arabic and a cultural insight. This isn't really relevant to learning Arabic, but it's interesting, so I'll share it with you. That like here in Somalia, people here don't think I'm English; they think I'm Syrian, because there's a lot of Syrian refugees here, and like if they see a Muslim who doesn't look like them, who's like light skinned and stuff, they just think that you're from Syria, and here it attracts less attention to be from Syria than to be from Britain, if you know what I mean. So I just let them believe it. they might come up to me and say some things in Arabic or whatever, and I just let them think it. I don't go around telling people I'm Syrian. The Syrians, they'd know I'm not Syrian, obviously, but yeah. So, but anyway, so like my Arabic teacher contributes that to my life a little bit, because I pick up his Syrian twangs a little bit here and there. but like, so that brought me on to something else. Where is Alaa from?
So Alaa is from the heart of Damascus, actually. So
wow.
he is a computer science major, and unfortunately ended up spending a year in Assad's prison, really because he was trying to help a friend out, while the city was under siege, and then. I'll let him narrate that story. So he basically then traveled to Istanbul while they were still kind of open, and so that's where I met him. He was kind of recovering from all of that, and it was like I've mashallah, I can't believe for what he's been through, what a positive guy he is. Never once brings up his problems, and he's always kind of. And that's what I find about the brothers from Syria, mashallah. I'm sure it applies to many other people in the world. It's just so positive about the world. I think it's kind of for me, it's interesting that he's actually really well read. So we kind of, whenever we seem to take on a topic, he seems to already kind of know about it, and we've talked about a whole wide range of things, but I think the key thing about him, which is, if I'm trying to make this kind of helpful for learners, is find someone who's going to be patient with you and not necessarily correct you all the time. So he's one of these people who's like really, he's able to be quite strategic about where he jumps in and corrects you, because he's trying to kind of gradually get you to fluency. And so what you don't want to kind of have someone who's kind of going through, okay, you know, that pronoun needs to be like this pronoun needs to be like that, or what have you. He's letting you speak, kind of taking notes, and then comes back and says, oh, you should have maybe said that. Let's try and work on that. And the other thing is, he's also open to the idea of, you know, the ideas that you have. So when the first lesson, you know, he gave me homework and I said, I'm not going to do any homework, sorry. It's not happening. So he was kind of open to that, right?
Yeah.
And there's been times where I've turned up to a lesson, I was like, you know what, I just want you to read this story for me. So you know, I've got kind of Sur min hayat sahaba and Sur min hayat tabi'in, and I've not managed to get through all of that, but sometimes I'll just be like, you know what, I'm not going to read this story. I'm going to get Alaa to read it for me and see how that works out. And so, you know, so having someone open to that idea that they're going to kind of take you along this journey. So that's been his, yeah. And I suppose just like your experience, it's kind of turning up to someone who's just a friend, you know, like their concerns are your concerns, you know, when something's happening to them, like it upsets you. And so this is that incidental learning again, like the Arabic is secondary to your friendship with this person. And I think that's, yeah, you've actually made me think about that a lot, and maybe I need to be more appreciative with him about this, actually.
It's something that definitely I've been having lessons with my teacher, this new teacher of mine, for a few months, and it's kind of something I already start to take for granted. But like I tried other teachers before, and like some of them are incredible teachers. Like there is no question about whether they're good teachers or not. But I didn't know if I'd have a relationship with them as like a friend. Like even if I wasn't having Arabic lessons, sometimes I message my Arabic teacher just with a thing that I've read or whatever, and he's just like my friend, really. And the Arabic's almost incidental, and that's like people who kind of marry someone who speak another language or something get the privilege of learning a language in that way, which is that's really cool. So like so on the topic of our Arabic teachers, there was something that Habib in the previous podcast said, which I thought was really interesting, about collaboration between individuals like ourselves who create resource or whatever. But when at the end of the day, we're not Arabs. At the end of the day, we're not native Arabic speakers. So when we have opportunities to have partnerships with people who are, and in ways that sometimes we maybe have we may, especially someone perhaps like myself who has a platform and things like that, can maybe communicate to English speakers in a particular way that maybe they can't if they're not strong English speakers. Like having partnerships between them is something really powerful. Like I wonder if you could speak to that at all. Like how much the partnership of having someone like yourself with obviously you're from a medical background, you've got a very particular type of brain for certain things, right? Having individuals like yourself in partnership with people who are native Arabic speakers, if you could speak at all to how beneficial that's been.
I think you've put me on the spot there a little bit. I might need to think about that.
Sure, no problem.
I think the problem I have being a medic is I tend to speak in quite a lot of generalities. I'd like to maybe think of a couple of examples.
Good. Well, I'll speak to it. I'll speak to it quickly. So, like, yeah, as I said, at the end of the day, no matter how good our Arabic gets, we're not native Arabic speakers, right? And like students, one of the issues that I think a lot of students really suffer in their listening, perhaps their listening is maybe the weakest of their skills a lot of the time. Unless they've been brought up in an Arabic-speaking family, where it might be their only skill in some cases. They sometimes have the opposite. But to be able to bring native Arabic speakers into our world a little bit and to be able to put them on, however it might be, like with you obviously through a company where you have an app and stuff, you're able to do that. And obviously in my work with the platform that I have, I think that's something that we need to work towards a lot more. That maybe isn't that common. Like it's only really in this conversation that I've realized, oh, hold on a minute, like Ryan's actually got a guy on his team who he met, who's a native Arabic speaker, and has brought him into the team.
Okay. Yeah. I see what you're going for now. Yeah. So yeah, I think if we press that button, I might not stop. So you know, I think the nature of the app initially meant that we needed script writers, we needed artists, we needed animators, we needed voice. So voice was actually probably the most important thing, getting the sound quality right and things like that. And so, yeah, I think engaging with people who are experts, but by the way, happen to be really good at Fusha. And I think that's quite kind of an important distinction we had. It was, you know, we couldn't just go to any Arab. It had to be like Arabs who were kind of comfortable with Fusha, at least. You know, it was quite surprising. So we worked on the app for maybe 18 months, and I think half the team were non-natives, half the team were natives. I was interesting that the meetings were gradually getting more and more kind of Fusha than English.
Sure.
You know, and I think that was, if that's what you were kind of shooting for, I think that was really interesting because, you know, kind of picking up technical jargon and stuff like that in Arabic was really quite an eye-opener for me. And I've got to the habit now that when I come to speak to Alaa or his friend Omar, my friend Omar, and you know, other people on the team, I feel when I start to speak in English, I feel like something's wrong. Now it's really quite odd. You know, it feels like speaking broken Arabic is much more rich and much more correct, kind of etiquette-wise, than trying to communicate an idea. And then when I say to them, look, I'm going to speak to you in English because this is really important. I need to get this idea through. I feel like I'm doing something horribly wrong, you know, and I feel like, okay, this is a little bit of a failure. So that's kind of me personally, but I think in terms of, you're right. I think it kind of speaks to that incidental approach. Is like, you know, you've got to try and find authentic experiences. And I think a lot has been, you know, it's a really complex topic, simplified versus authentic material for things like that. But, you know, if you can find those authentic experiences, it's going to be amazing for you, because, you know, that's where you're going to see your Arabic, like we said before, you're getting yourself a working Arabic, an Arabic that's actually achieving the purpose of communication. So we've toyed with lots of ideas, actually, and it may be something maybe I just throw out there right now, but, you know, the idea of an Arabic workshop. I think our ideal scenario is that we perhaps make our core team redundant eventually, because we would like to see people meeting as friends in coffee shops. And perhaps, you know, we've kind of put out an open source idea for how that might be structured, for example, you know, so in the same way that you'd have comprehension aiding supplementation in story listening, you might come to a session where you're going to order a coffee, and, you know, whoever's facilitating kind of, you know, as soon as you're greeted at the door, they kind of gauge where you're at, you know, okay, so you're going to sit on this novice table. We have a native Arab there who's going to talk you through this menu, which we've translated into Arabic, and help you order from the Arabic speaking waiter. So even though it kind of seems a little bit contrived, it's kind of, you know, it's a halfway house between completely simplified and kind of a truly authentic experience. But then people are just seeing things happening in seeing the Arabic come alive, you know, or to have actually hakawatis, like that concept. I don't know if you came across that when you were in the Sham. I think you went to Palestine, didn't you? Yeah. I think the hakawatis are unique to the Sham. So I've spoken to Egyptians who didn't really know what that was, but it's similar to, I suppose, having the football showing at a coffee house or something like that. It's a way of keeping people in the coffee shop. And so they'll be there with their coffee and their hubble bubble, and you know, listening to this guy like just literally tell a story. And I gather that's something that's dying out at the moment, and people are trying to reintroduce it in various ways. But we thought, well, look, what could that Hakawati program look like if we had people who just kind of voluntarily pitch up and say to local students, hey, we're going to have a storytelling session. Come in, like it'll work for the coffee house because they're going to sell coffee or cakes or whatever.
Sure.
And this this storyteller could using the principles of story listening, be teaching by storytelling. It'd be pretty amazing. I think I would turn up to that. But yeah, let's see. It's kind of like these are the ideas that we might kind of try out and see what happens.
Good.
Need to build up a bit of a following first. Let's see.
Good, inshallah. Well, I'll let you get on. So I want to say thank you so much for joining me on the Arabic in 60 Steps podcast. Once again, it's an absolute pleasure to get an opportunity to speak to you, to hear more about where Arabic Workshop is in its journey. And we're coming up to a really exciting series. I mean, as we're recording this, we're just over a week away, aren't we? A week. Yeah. So I'll aim for this to go out on the 14th. So the students will have a few days between this going out and the actual start of the 100 days of Arabic, inshallah. So thank you so much. Jazakallah khairan. There's no kind of fancy fade to black or anything like that. All we do is we just we say goodbye with a ma'a salama and assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.